Thanks for joining us. This is Sarah Jones with Politicus Radio. Joining me to talk about the impact of the historic Women's March on Donald Trump's presidency is Politicus USA's editor-in-chief, Jason Easley. The Women's March made history as the largest single-day protest in U.S. history, as somewhere between 3.6 million and 4.5 million people marched across the country. As a woman said to me today, "Now you've really pissed us off." This has the potential to really have a huge impact on Donald Trump's agenda and presidency since he's already dealing with historically low approval ratings. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the masses were a little late maybe in waking up. I think it took women in this country to wake them up. And that's what this march did yesterday.
Are you saying the women woke everyone up yesterday?
I'm saying the women woke up a sizable segment of this population and got more mainstream attention for the anti-Trump opposition in this country than anyone, including all the Democratic candidates last year, was able to do in a single day.
I think that's a really important point, and I'm really glad you put it that way, because since the Democrats lost the presidential election, there's been a lot of jostling for power, and it seems like some people want to take the party back to being an ode to white men, when in fact the growing coalition that the party's been building all this time is about diversity, and it's about empowerment for everyone and equal rights for everyone, which is what this march was about. And I think that gets to the heart of what this country stands for, so I liked how you put that, and women are good at that. That's something women do really well. They had a peaceful protest. They were all around this country, in fact, around the world. Even in Antarctica, in fact, they were all around the world protesting, and they were wearing the penguins. I sent you
Women's March of the Penguins.
The March of the Penguins. It was. I think everyone has been in such despair since this election, and then you see these just millions of women coming out. Women got babysitters. They paid for their own flights to come to D.C. They brought their kids with them if they couldn't get a babysitter, or they wanted some of the husbands came. Men came out. This was just an amazing, uplifting show of spirit that we are not going to sit here while this man who doesn't stand for anything that most Americans believe in tries to take away our rights and tries to ruin this country.
What was really uplifting, and you saw a lot of this in the press coverage, was the amount of families.
Yeah.
You talked about children and men and women. I mean, there were a lot of families involved. And that just goes to show that the real family values, Donald Trump is not family values. The Trump family is not family values, as in not political family values, but just the culture of family. They don't embody that. And even that spills over into policy, but they don't embody that to the point where the real families in this country, families were coming out and saying, we believe in this. We support this. This was the heart of America, to paraphrase those old Chevrolet ads.
Mm-hmm. I think it was. I mean, you could feel that, and that's why when the media started to say this is the new Tea Party, that's why I wrote an article that this is not the new Tea Party. This is America. This is the majority of America. Donald Trump did not win the popular vote. We need to keep repeating that because they seem to think they have a mandate. Now, in terms of the hugeness of this protest and its impact on Donald Trump's agenda and his ability to get things done, I mean, he came in with this historically low approval rating, and now the more people protest and the worse he reacts to it, which he did, instead of acknowledging the protesters yesterday like a smart person would have done, he made everything worse. He had a horrible event at the CIA, which he went there and basically rambled like he was incoherent and self-aggrandizing. It was embarrassing. It was a spectacle to be embarrassed of, and I saw many Republicans were embarrassed by it. It was that bad. And then his press secretary came and tried to humiliate the press, and all of this to distract from the very low turnout he had for his inauguration, and this huge show of people protesting what he stands for and protesting his presidency. And then today, he first thing, this morning, he tweets something about these protesters, what are they doing protesting after the election? We already had it. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what he said. But basically he was saying, why are they protesting? We already had an election. He seems to not understand the concept of dissent. He doesn't understand that many people don't agree with him. So he needs he needed to have dealt with this protest maturely, and he should have asked these people to come to the White House for a meeting so he could hear what they wanted and what their concerns were, but instead he silenced them. He tried to. So that's not, I mean, he's just going to keep losing approval ratings and he won't be able to get anything done. That's what I can see happening. Or he's going to be driven crazy.
We have seen this out of Trump from the very beginning. Trump, anytime attention is taken away from him, tries to counter-program.
Mm-hmm.
He tries to counter-program and get the media spotlight back on him. And that is what I think yesterday really was about.
Right.
I think yesterday was about him going to the CIA. I mean, as was pointed out, I believe on Hardball with Chris Matthews, why would Trump go to the CIA on a Saturday when the full staff isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
Why would he do this late on a Saturday afternoon?
Right.
And the answer was because he was trying to take away attention from these protests.
Right.
The answer was he was trying to counter-program. Anytime attention goes off of Trump, Trump's going to throw a tantrum and try to counter-program. You're right. He doesn't act presidential ever. He doesn't say to the protesters, sit down and talk to my administration.
Right.
What are your concerns?
Right.
I accept your concerns as valid.
Right. I mean, really, and this goes to actually, there's a much broader point we could be making here, so I'll just touch on this. We don't have time to get into it in depth, but, you know, there's a lot of concern. I mean, he's basically trying to turn the press into his propaganda machine, and we can see that happening. But one of the things that I keep noticing is they just don't have the subtlety. I mean, the Russians do this much better, and it's weird that he hasn't taken lessons from people, or maybe he just isn't capable of learning from when other people tell him, because I think he only really takes counsel from himself. But if he really wanted to be a propagandist, he should have invited them with courtesy to the White House and made a big show of that, and that would have been the headline. And then he would have, with contempt, completely dismissed them in private, and no one would have to know. No one would have to know. They wouldn't have any way of knowing that he wasn't going to do anything with their concerns. But instead, he makes this public spectacle of himself. So in terms of the things he wants to get done, it's even hard to say what those things are, really, because he changes his stance so often. But let's just say he had a policy agenda, and because I know the Republicans do. So let's say that's their agenda that he is there to advance. The more the public speaks out, the more they call Congress, the more they are seen in public. And they do events like this huge march yesterday, and every day doesn't have to, obviously can't be that big, and everything doesn't have to be like that. Was historic, but smaller versions of that, of speaking out every day, the more Congress hears that stuff, even though they feel pretty safe because they're in gerrymandered districts, many of them in the House, even though they feel that way, the public will have an impact eventually. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, how much does it take?
I think for Trump, it's not going to have any impact on his immediate agenda. The march wasn't, it was no accident. The march was timed, A, around the inaugural, and B, Republicans made it no secret, as of this week, they're taking up defunding Planned Parenthood in the House. And ACA repeal they were already working on before that. I think that when you look at the longer perspective, if there is one weakness the left has had, it has been that they gather for one big events and then they kind of drift off a little bit and then they kind of gather back up. You're right. In this circumstance, the pressure needs to be constant, which means that there needs to be marches to keep healthcare. There needs to be a march to not defund Planned Parenthood. I mean, there needs to be marches for every single thing on this agenda, constant, consistent. And we talked about it yesterday, not on the air. We were talking about the model, I think, for this is the Vietnam War protests and how consistent and constant the protests were.
It's that pressure that will mount up.
It's that pressure. It's like a pressure cooker. And eventually, if you don't release the valve, the only way they can release the valve is by not carrying out this extremist agenda.
Be an instant pot, people. Be an instant pot.
Be an instant pot. Yes, in modern parlance.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of, this was the first big step that showed what is possible. It is heartening. It is encouraging. It shows that there is a real grassroots movement in this country against this agenda, against this president, against the majority in Congress.
Well, and you made a point earlier, and I think we should touch on this just briefly, is that a lot of the things the Republicans are poised to take away from people. You didn't see people protesting this when they were doing this in Congress. You didn't see it when Obama was in office. They didn't really speak out. They didn't come out. They didn't come out to vote in 2016 the way they could have, obviously, or we wouldn't be in this situation. So rather than blaming those people for not coming out, though, I mean, because I think that's a wasted thing. I see that happening a lot. What the point is, why weren't they compelled to come out? Why didn't they see what was happening? Because this has been going on in Congress for a long time, and it seems like maybe it's always been this way, but it seems like unless we have a personality to attach to something, it's hard to get people engaged. See, Obama had the charisma. He had this authenticity about him that he inspired people to action. Then Donald Trump has the same kind of charisma, but in reverse. He's a negative charisma. People are reacting to him because he's so hateful and he says such awful things. So he attracts attention that way. These are almost like, two opposite, opposing things. I don't think Trump's is as strong as Obama's, though. And I'm going to put that down forever because I don't believe that. I think hope has a lot more contagion, is more powerful in the end. But so how do we get people to be engaged when there isn't a Donald Trump attached to this?
I think the reason why people are more engaged now, in fact, is Trump and the fact that Obama's gone. Obama was the great firewall for a lot of the left for a long time. They could always take comfort in the fact that Obama was there. Obama would never let certain things happen, no matter how many midterm elections the Democrats lost, there was still Obama. Well, as they say, stuff just got real when Trump moved into the White House. All these things that I think people, and there was some complacency, I believe, among the left and Democrats in the 2016 election, because they had had 8 years of progress, and they were used to it. And they really didn't fathom that this person that they think is a buffoon could come in and make it go away.
Well, see, I think it's hard. I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, but I also think that, at least among the women that I talked to, women knew. They knew what was at stake. Many women knew how horrible this was going to be, and here we are. It's turning into...
And we always talk about, every time we talk about women voters, we always talk about the age difference. Mm-hmm. You brought this up constantly during the election. The difference between younger women and really much younger women, like voting age, millennial age women, mm-hmm. and the rest of the population. Because it seemed like, as you said, younger women didn't maybe understand. They weren't...
Well, sometimes I
feeling the
urgency.
I think, of the situation.
I think yes. When you have always had these rights, and it's not, and it's a generation away from you, a whole generation away from you, it's easy to think, I was brought into, my mother raised me to believe I could do anything. My father said the same thing to me. No one ever told me there were limits. It was out in the world. It wasn't until I was working and starting to realize there are these limits here. No one told me about them. And I think that's a truth for many women. You don't know. And even when you're very young, you don't see those limits because you haven't had a lot of work experience, and you think that happens to other people. You don't think it's going to happen to you, and you think, well, if you're competent and you work hard, you're going to get what you deserve. But it doesn't turn out that way. So I think until they saw, for many people, and I'm not. This isn't. I don't mean to generalize. Yeah. No, it's not fair. But I'm just trying to make sense of it, really. And I think it's easy to think that those rights are always going to be here, and not see this encroaching. What Republicans did was it was every year they were taking away more and more rights, and people who were able to pay attention every day could track that progress. But not everybody has time for that, and many people aren't even interested in it. So there you go. All of a sudden, one day, boom, you're not going to be able to go to the get your well checked. You can't have an abortion if your life's at risk. I mean, this is what we're facing now. This is a huge wake up call.
This reminds me similarly of your friend Scott Nevins.
Yes.
On the programs you do with him. He's
on the Ann Walker show.
Yeah, he was frequent. I remember actually I listened every time you were on the program. There was this urgency about him of what mm-hmm. was going to happen to the LGBT community if Trump won.
Right.
For months he was saying this.
He made that point. He was so good about that. And
you made that point in terms of women and everyone else. And it just seems like a lot of people assumed that the progress that came with Obama was going to be safe.
Yeah. I couldn't understand. A lot of times I was talking to women that, say they care about LGBT rights, for example.